Registration form is so popular that every website has it, but sometimes it's a bit tricky to make. In this video, we're going to use HTML and CSS to create a responsive website. We're going to work with desktop, tablet, and mobile view. We're also going to add a small animation to the input. And lastly, we're going to use a bit of JavaScript to change the background on load. If you want to follow along, be sure to check out the description to download the resources as well as the design. But if you're ready, let's get started. Alright, so let's start off by changing the title to be Behold, because this application is Behold. And for the icon, we're going to use Behold logo small. You can see it changed over here. So in the body, we want to create a div with the ID of container. In the container, I want to create two new containers. First one is for the logo container, and the second one would be the panel container. In the logo container, we're going to use an image with the source is the, let's say, the Behold logo. And for the alternative text, we're going to just say Behold for now. Yes, we have the logo. And in the panel, I want to create a panel. In the panel, we're going to use an H1 for the heading. In here, we're going to say create an account. And after that, we're going to have a p tag. Is going to be, actually I'm going to name it panel subheading. We're going to use a common BAM naming in this video. And let's say panel heading. Let's go to Figma and select the element and copy the text and paste it in here. In here, I want to use an A tag for the sign. So let's make an A tag and copy the sign inside. It looks about right. After my subheading, I want to create a new form. We don't need the action for now. In the form, let's start off by creating an input, but we don't want to use the input tag. We want to use an div tag with the input ID, input class, because we want to hold the label as well. For the label, let's say the first one is email address. And let's create an input. It's going to be type email. And let's also say required. And we need to put an ID for the neighbor to know. So let's say email address. This typo. And we need to use the same string for the for of the label and the ID of the input. So let's say email address. Right, so now we have it. Let's also copy this and paste it in here. So next input we want to have is a first name. So let's quickly change that. Similarly, we have to do the same thing, but instead of email, we're going to use text type for the first name, and it is similar to the last name. Okay, this one is last name, type text, last name, and I want to, because I want these to input in the same row, so I'm going to create a div with the class name, and I'm going to put them inside. The next thing we have to do is the password. So let's just copy these input and then change this to be password. This one will be password, and this one would be type password, and this one is password. Notice here that with the input type password, the value would be hidden, so it's pretty useful. Next, we want to have the date of birth. So I'm going to create a div and name it date of bird. In here we want to have a heading, so let's say h6 with the class name of date of birth and heading. In here, let's see what is the text. The text is date of birth, so let's just copy it and paste it inside. And below that, we want to have a drop down. So I'm going to create a div with the class name drop down. In here, we also need a label, so let's just copy this. It's going to be month. And we want to use the select tag for the drop down. So let's say select, and then we're going to have 4 options. Alright, the name is super important when you actually use a value. So, but for now, let's just say month. For the ID would be similar, like the same in the for attribute in the label. So month. This one will be Jan. Alright. It will be tedious. It could be a bit tedious now, but bear with me. January and then February, and then March is easier to write, and then lastly we have April. Right, now we have the drop down. Next we want to have another input, so let's copy this input and after the drop down, this input is going to be day. We want to use type number, and you notice here that when we save it, the input type number would have an arrow up and down, which is useful sometimes, but most of the time I don't use that. But it's useful to note. And also we want to add min value of 1 and the max value of 31. And lastly, we're going to have the year for the date of birth. Let's see, year here. This still type number is required. ID year, mean, let's say 1900, and then 2020, because no one was born like outside it, I guess. But yeah, but enough about the date of birth. And after that, we want to, let's see what after it. After that, we want to have the consent paragraph. So let's say p.consent. Let's paste that in there. And we want to have 2 links here. So let's say a tag and then copy this inside. And similarly with the privacy policy. Let's copy this. Right. So now we have it. And yeah, so after that we want to have a button. And let's say it's going to be submit. And it's going to be create account. Yeah, one thing I want to do is go back to our form and say on submit. And let's say alert success. And now if we click the create account button, the form will be validated. So if we type the correct value, so let's try it, random mail.com, and first name to name, password 123456. Well, I'm not recommending this password, but this for just a testing purpose. And day 12 1996. It's 15 actually, but anyhow, let's try it. Now it's successful, so it's super useful for the form, the default form tags. But yeah, so that's how you work with the HTML. The next step is to work with CSS. So let's move on. So let's create a new file and name it style.css. And let's go to our index and say link CSS, and it should be fine. And before doing anything, I want to reset some of the property. So it's going to be box sizing, border box. One tip, if you don't know what it does, you can always hover it. There should be a description and a link. If you select that, it would be a full description of what it does. So basically we just want to count the padding and the border to the width and the height of the element. But anyway, let's move on to our font. The font would be inherit and the color would be also inherit. So now if I save that, everything would be reset, the color and the default font size. And let's move on to our body. In the body, let's say we want to remove the padding and remove the margin, and then also use the font here, but let's go to Google font, not Google font, and this time we're going to use Lato. One thing about Lato is that it's super flexible and modern typography, so you can use for almost anything. So yeah, so let's copy this and paste it in the head, and let's copy this as well and paste it in here. Right, so let's go back here. It looks good, and then I want to reset or like give everything a color of 222 because I don't like the dark black color by default. So yeah, so for the p tag I want to give it a max width of 600 because I don't like the paragraph to be too wide. Right, yeah, so let's also add some variables. So let's say root. We're going to have text, color, and then we have border color and primary color. And let me check the value of those. The first one would be 8282, and the second one would be E0 E0 E0, and the primary is going to be this. Right, so now I think we're ready to style the element. So the first thing we want to start from is the container. Let's put a mark with 1100 pixel and then margin 0 out 2. What it does is that it's going to put a mark width to the container, and then it's going to center the container in the middle. Yeah, it's going to show in the bigger screen. So let's go back to this container, and let's also say padding to be 24 pixel because we want to have some spacing in the border. Right, so this time we want to use display grid, and we want to have 12 columns. So let's say grid template column. We want to repeat 12 times one fraction, and then we're going to create a gap of 24 pixel. What it does is that it's going to create a 12 grid column, but then we need to tell the browser how many column does each container take. So let's say for the logo container, let's say it's going to take grid column. It's going to take from number 1 and end at number 5. And for the panel container, it's going to start number 6 and at number 12. So the no-go is going to take the first 4 columns, and the panel container is going to take the column number 6 to the column number 11. But yeah, now we have that. And also add the container to have a height of 100% and the body with the height of 100 view height. Right. And yeah, let's also center the content vertically. We can do that by say a line item center. It looks good. And let's go back to our body. Let's say background image, and let's use an image from the image folder. So let's say ball. Yep. Now we cannot see the text, and by that let's move on to the panel. In the panel, let's give it a background color white, and then padding 24 pixel, border radius 8 pixel. It's also going to have a box shadow, but I don't remember it, so let's go to Figma and then select the element, copy the attribute or the style, and then paste it in here. Alright, it looks good now. Let's continue with our panel heading. This is going to have a font size of 24 pixel. Color, no, it's still black color, and then font weight 700. Alright, let's remove the margin as well. Right, so let's continue with our panel subheading. In here we want to remove the margin, and then font size would be 12 pixel, and color would be the text color. Right, and we want the link to have the primary color, so let's go to after the B tag, let's say color primary, and then text decoration none. Right, it looks much better. And then let's go back to our subheading. Let's say margin top to be 8 pixel and margin bottom to be 24 pixel. Yeah, looks great. And let's continue by styling our input. So let's select the input container, and then let's put it margin bottom of 20 pixel. And then for the input label, we want to say font size 12 pixel, and then color to be text color. Yeah, and we also want to display block, so it's gonna take the whole line. Right, so let's continue by styling our input. The input going to have border none, but the border bottom would be 1 pixel solid, and then the border color. Right, I'd also put the width of 100% and also remove the outline, because the outline does not look good in this input style. So let's say outline none. Right, it looks much better. And while we add the input, let's add the animation that I promised at the beginning. So what I want to do is go back to the HTML, and in the input I want to get a div, and I'm gonna call them input indicator. It's just going to be an empty div, and in here we want to say input indicator, and I'm going to give it position absolute. And in order to make the absolute position to work, we need to go to the parent and put it position relative. And what I want to say in here is bottom 0, left 0, height 2 pixel, and then width 100%. and background color is going to be primary color. Alright, now we have it, but we only want to show it when we focus on the input. Now I notice here that the input has some padding, so let's go to the input and remove the padding. Yeah, now it looks better. And it also increase the height of the input to be 28 pixels as well. Yeah, looks much better. And yeah, going back to the input indicator, we only want to show it when we focus on the input. So let's say only when we focus on the input, we want to select the input indicator because it's in the same level, so we need to use this syntax to select the input indicator when the input is focused. So in here I want to say when it focused, the background is primary. Yep, so it works like we intended, but let's make it more fun by adding some animation. So first thing I want to do is transition R all, and then 300 millisecond is in out, and let's try it. Already working, but then we want to animate the width as well. So let's say width 100 here, but in here it's going to be 0. There you go, it's working. But I want it to like expand from the center. What we can do is say left 50%, and then when it focuses, it's going to be 0. There you go. Pretty simple but super powerful. And let's copy the indicator to the rest of the other inputs as well. So let's just copy and paste it. It should be not difficult job. So in here, yeah, so check it out. Everything worked perfectly. So yeah, so let's continue with our name. So if you remember, we have a container for the last name and the first name. So let's say name display grid, and then grid column with template column 1 fraction and 1 fraction. So it will be 2 column and then the gap of 12 pixel. Yeah, it's working awesome. And let's move on to our date of birth. In here, let's select the heading. It's going to have a font size of 12 pixel. What is the color? Is it the same color of the text color? Let's try it out. Yeah, it looks about right. And then font weight going to be 700. Yeah, looks good. And let's remove the margin here. Yeah, and add the margin bottom to be 8 pixel. Yeah, looks good. And let's move on to our style drop down. In our drop down, let's select the label. The label is going to have the, actually let's just go back to the label. Where is that? And copy this to just make sure that it has the same style. Right. And let's say drop down input with 100%. It does not do anything yet. Oh, it's not input, isn't that? It's going to be select. Yes, and then border none, but then have the border bottom 1 pixel solid, and then the border color. Yeah, it looks good now. And then also put the height of 28 pixel, and then padding 0. Yeah, it looks okay. And then let's go back to the indexed, and we want to have the month, day, and year in the same line. And in order to do that, we kind of have to create a new div, and this one would be date of birth input. And let's copy the drop down, the to input inside it. Right, and then let's select that in the CSS input, display flags, no, not flag, display what is that again, grid, and then with template column, one function, and one function. So it's going to create 3 columns, and the gap would be 12 pixels. Yeah, looks great. And then move on to our consent. The consent going to have the font size of 12 pixels, color text color, and let's move the padding and margin there. The margin 0, padding 0. But then we want to add a margin bottom of 40 pixels. Yeah, looks about right. So we want to center the button, so we can say button display blog, and then margin 0 out 2. Right, it looks good. And then while we add it, let's remove the border, none, padding 10 pixel and 24 pixel, color white, background color, let's say primary color, and then border radius to be 8 pixel. Yeah, it looks good. I think now we already have almost everything done. The only thing left is the responsiveness. So let's move on to make this website responsive. So in order to make it responsive, we're going to use media query. So let's say media on the screen and max width of 660. In here, I'm going to say the logo container display none, and the panel container, I want to say grid column. So instead of starting from number 6 to number 12, I'm going to say it starts from number 1 and span 12 column. So it's going to take 12 column instead of only 5 like before. So if we go to smaller screen, you can see that now it takes almost the width of the screen. But if we go to really small one like this space does not make sense anymore. So in order to remove it, let's copy and create a new breakpoint. This time it's going to be 360, and let's select the panel. Actually, let's select the container first. Container, and let's remove the padding. And let's select the panel. In the panel, let's say height is going to take 100 view height, and then the border radius is going to be, let's say 8 pixel. Oh no, it's going to be 0 pixel. Yeah, now it looks much better and is now responsive. So before we move on, let's go back to our logo container. We want to center this logo in the center of the container. So we can say display flex and justify content center. And let's try to change the background image to be, let's say, flower plant. And now the image is cropped a lot, and as well as the contrast is not enough. So let's say background size to be covered, and then we want to add a little bit of overlay over the background. So let's go back to our HTML and create a div. It's going to be background overlay, and let's copy everything inside it. And in the background overlay, we need to say the height to be 100%. And then we want to give it a background color and RGBA. It's going to be 0, 0, 0, and 0.5. So it's going to be black, but with the opacity of 0.5. So now you can see that we have more contrast between the panel and the background. So that's pretty much conclude our CSS. But still, one more thing we want to do is to change the background like randomly when we go to the page. So in order to do that, let's go to our index.html and let's create a script tag. So in the script tag, we want to create a new function, and let's call it change background. In here, let's select the body. So let's say document.body, and we want to change the background image of the body. So let's say style.background images image. So in the script tag, we want to create a new function and call it change background. In here, let's select the body. So let's say document.body, and we want to change the background image of the body. So let's say style.background image, and then this could be equal to an URL, and we got to import the image from image folder, and then the image name. But now we don't have the image name yet, so let's create a variable called images, and this is going to be an array of string, and let me just copy it over. And yeah, so whenever we call the change background, let's also create a random number, and this one will be math.floor, and inside would be math.random is a function, so let's call it and multiply by the images.length. Right, and we want to use in here, we want to say the images and take a random number. Right, so the last thing we have to do is to call the change background. So let's say window.onload equal to change background. So now whenever we refresh it, it's going to select a random background, and because of that, we don't need the background here anymore. So let's remove it, and when we change it, it worked perfectly. So that's how you create a responsive registration form. If you want to have more designs and more challenges, check out devchallenges.io, and don't forget to hit subscribe button as well as follow me on Twitter. And beside that, see you in the next video, and happy coding. Bye.